When I saw the man step off the bus, leaning on his cane like it was the only thing keeping him upright, I didn't know that my entire life was about to change. I wasn't expecting anyone. And I certainly wasn't expecting him, an elderly man with kind eyes that somehow held a storm, a man who would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and even myself. Most mornings I woke up with the same sinking feeling, the kind of weight that settles in your chest before your feet even hit the floor. The apartment smelled like cold coffee and a hint of mildew from the humid air outside. My phone buzzed softly on the nightstand with a reminder, budget report due today. And the only thing more predictable than the reports was the constant low hum of the city outside my window, a never-ending soundtrack to my life. I worked as the office manager for Porter Premier Properties, the real estate firm owned by my older sister, Vivian. It was glamorous on the outside. Well, dressed clients, glossy brochures, and the kind of business lunches that included more wine than water. But behind the scenes, it was a different story. I was underpaid, overworked, and constantly overlooked. Vivian was the star, confident, dazzling, and ruthless. She wore her power like a second skin, sharp and untouchable. I was the one who kept the engine running, the one who answered the phones, scheduled the meetings, dealt with irate clients, and cleaned up the messes no one else wanted to touch. Our parents had died more than 10 years ago in a car accident, a memory I still couldn't shake. After that, it was just Vivian and me. At least that's what I thought. I believed she was my only family left. I was wrong. That day started like any other, with the stale smell of the office printer and the clack of keyboards. Vivian was already in her element, discussing a deal with a client when I slipped in with the mail. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped impatiently on the desk as she barely glanced my way. "Anything urgent?" she asked without looking up. "Just the usual, contracts, invoices, and this envelope." I held up a thick manila envelope that didn't look like it came from any of our clients. Vivian's eyes flicked toward it briefly before returning to her phone. "Put it on my desk." I did, but something about the envelope unsettled me. I tucked it away in my purse and went to grab a coffee. On the bus ride here, I had noticed an older man struggling with his bags, and something about his worn coat and gentle smile tugged at me. I helped him, walking with him until he reached his stop. He thanked me warmly, introducing himself as Walt. That little interaction felt like a small break in my routine. Something genuine, something human. I didn't realize then how pivotal it would be. The moment Walt stepped into the office, everything changed. Vivian froze. The polished veneer cracked. Her breath hitched ever so slightly, and the confident smile faltered. "Vivian," Walt said softly, but with an unmistakable authority. Her eyes widened, and she turned sharply to me. "Who is this?" she demanded. Walt smiled sadly. "I'm Walter Hayes, your grandfather." I wanted to ask questions, how, when, why, but all that came out was a whisper. "Grandfather, I thought you were dead." Vivian's face twisted, a flicker of anger and fear crossing her features. He passed away years ago," she said quickly, as if trying to bury a secret beneath her flawless composure. Walter shook his head. "No, I'm very much alive, and I've been watching for years, watching what you've done." The air thickened with tension. I realized in that moment that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. Walter told me the truth that day, slowly, painfully, like peeling away the layers of a wound. Vivian had lied about his death, and worse, about me. She told Walter that I had died in the accident that took our parents, erasing me from his life. But the real betrayal was financial. Walter had uncovered that Vivian had stolen my entire inheritance, $800,000 meant for me after our parents passed. She'd given me a mere $15,000 and used the rest to fund her business, her lifestyle, her lies. 8 years of manipulation and deceit came crashing down in that office, with Vivian standing between us, caught. Walter's private investigation had unearthed forged documents, stolen funds, and a calculated scheme to isolate me from any family or financial security. I felt the floor drop beneath me. The woman I called sister, the one I trusted, had spent years building her empire on my back, while I struggled just to pay the rent. That evening after Walter left, I sat in my tiny apartment, the shadows stretching long on the walls, feeling like I was suffocating beneath the weight of everything. The stale air seemed to close in, but beneath the shock a spark began to grow. A fierce need for truth, for justice. I wasn't just going to stand by. I had a story to reclaim, my story, and I was going to fight to get it back. The next morning, the office felt colder somehow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what was to come. And then I showed up early, nerves tangled tight in my chest, clutching a small folder Walter had given me copies of documents, bank statements, and a note from Miranda Shaw, a lawyer Walter had trusted to help us unravel the mess. I still couldn't wrap my head around it all. The years of lies. The betrayal by the person I should have been able to trust the most. Vivian arrived like clockwork, elegant, poised, but there was a shadow behind her eyes that hadn't been there before. I could almost smell the fear clinging to her, mingling with the faint perfume she always wore. I tried to keep my voice steady when I spoke. "Vivian, I know what you did." "I have proof," she laughed, bitter and cold. "Proof? What are you talking about, Sadie?" "I'm talking about the money you stole, the lies you told Grandpa, the years you spent building this company on my inheritance." For a moment she said nothing. Then, with a sharp smile, she said, "You think you can just come in here and ruin everything. You don't have a clue what you're dealing with." "I have more than a clue," I said. "Walter's hired a lawyer, Miranda Shaw. She's ready to fight. And so am I." Vivian's jaw tightened. "You think you're the victim? You're nothing. You were always in the way." That was the moment I realized just how far she had fallen into her own darkness. The woman who had once been my sister was now a stranger, bitter, cruel, and desperate. I met with Miranda the next day in her modest downtown office. The walls were lined with books and framed degrees, the faint scent of coffee and old paper filling the air. Miranda's sharp eyes met mine with a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Sadie, this is serious. Vivian's forged documents, stolen funds, and manipulation of Walter constitute multiple felonies," she said, flipping through the folder Walter had compiled. "But we're going to build an airtight case." I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Justice felt close, but the road ahead was uncertain and long. Days. Walter and I worked closely with Miranda, poring over bank statements, contracts, emails, each piece revealing more of Vivian's web of deceit. The hardest part was facing Walter. He was a man marked by time and sorrow, his hands trembling slightly as he recounted memories of my parents and of Vivian. But his presence was a balm, a reminder that family wasn't just about blood or secrets, but about truth and love. At work, I kept my head down, but whispers began swirling around the office. Vivian's sharp smiles grew rarer. One afternoon, as I filed papers in the back room, a colleague poked her head in. "Sadie, are you really going to go through with this?" she asked quietly. "Vivian's got clients and connections. You're playing with fire." I looked her in the eye, voice calm but resolute. "I'm not just fighting for myself. I'm fighting for my parents' memory, for Walter, for what's right." Then came the day of the confrontation. Vivian was called into a meeting with Miranda, Walter, and me. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Miranda laid out the evidence, documents, bank records, testimony. Vivian's defenses crumbled, her voice rising in panic. "None of this is true. You're lying," she shouted. But the cold, hard facts spoke louder than her words. Police officers arrived shortly after, placing handcuffs on Vivian's wrists. She stared at me with something close to hatred, but also something I hadn't seen before: defeat. Word spread quickly. The media caught wind of the scandal. Porter Premier Properties' glossy facade shattered, clients pulled out. The company crumbled under the weight of Vivian's crimes. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. Vivian was convicted on multiple charges: forgery, theft, elder financial exploitation, and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 27 years in prison. With Vivian gone, Walter, and I finally began to rebuild what had been stolen from me. I received the inheritance that was rightfully mine. It paid off debts I thought I'd never escape. It put me back in school, where I studied property management with a new vision, to create a business founded on honesty and care. I started Hayes Home Management, a small but growing company dedicated to ethical property management. Walter was there for every step, his presence steady and reassuring. Looking back, I realized the biggest lesson this ordeal taught me. No matter how carefully lies are constructed, the truth always finds a way to surface. It's messy, painful, and sometimes terrifying, but it sets you free. In the quiet moments, when the city's noise faded to a dull hum outside my apartment window, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the shock, the long fight for justice, it had left scars, yes, but it had also taught me about strength I didn't know I had. One of the hardest parts was learning to trust again. For years, I had clung to the belief that Vivian was my only family. After all, we had grown up together, shared childhood memories, and carried the weight of losing Mom and Dad. But beneath that surface, Vivian had built a life on lies and cruelty, isolating me from my grandfather and stealing my future. Walter was different. There was kindness in his eyes, a softness that had nothing to do with the money or the court battles. He didn't see me as a threat or a pawn. He saw me as his granddaughter, a person worth fighting for. We began spending more time together. Sunday afternoons became our ritual. Sometimes we'd sit on the porch of his modest home, drinking tea and talking about things long past. Other times we'd walk through the park nearby, our steps slow but sure. I watched as the tremor in his hands softened, as the sadness that clung to him began to lift. And I felt a warmth growing inside me. A family restored, not by blood alone, but by love and truth. Starting Hayes Home Management was both terrifying and exhilarating. I wanted to create something that felt honest, that could stand apart from the greed and deceit that had nearly destroyed my life. In the beginning, it was just me and Walter working late nights, organizing client files and answering calls. We didn't have fancy offices or a massive team, but we had integrity, and that mattered more than anything. I remember one evening after closing a deal with a small family who needed a trustworthy property manager, I sat back in my chair and let out a breath. I didn't realize it'd been holding. The smell of fresh paper and the soft glow of my desk lamp filled the room. Walter, sitting beside me with a gentle smile, said, "You're building something good, Sadie. Something real." His words grounded me, reminding me how far I had come. There were moments when the past crept back, uninvited. A late night call from a client who reminded me of Vivian's old tricks. Mighting. The echo of Vivian's voice in a memory, sharp and cutting, but I learned to face those moments with quiet strength. I wasn't the scared girl who had felt trapped in a life of shadows. I was a woman who had reclaimed her story. Forgiveness wasn't easy. Part of me wanted to hold on to anger, to let it burn. But I realized that carrying that weight wouldn't heal me. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what Vivian had done. It was about freeing myself. One day, Walter and I sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The world outside was calm, but inside me, a sense of peace was blooming. I thought about the tangled web of lies and pain, and how truth had finally broken through. About the family I thought I had lost but had found again in the most unexpected way. I thought about you, listening now, wondering how you'd face your own betrayals, your own heartbreaks. Would you have had the courage to stand up, to fight for what's right, even when the path seemed impossible? Thank you for sharing this journey with me. If you felt the sting of betrayal or the power of truth, please share your story in the comments. Together, we find strength. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of family, resilience, and hope, please subscribe and join us on this journey. Until next time, take care of yourself and those you love. Life has a way of testing us, sometimes gently, sometimes with the force of a storm. When I lost my parents, I thought my world had ended. When Vivian's betrayal came to light, it felt like the last thread holding me together was about to snap. But I learned that even in our darkest moments, there's a light, a truth that can set us free. My story isn't just about money or family secrets. It's about finding the strength to reclaim your life, even when those closest to you try to take everything away. It's about forgiveness, not for them, but for yourself. And it's about hope, that no matter how broken things seem, healing is possible. So, I ask you, when faced with betrayal, would you stand up and fight for your truth, or would you let the lies define you? Share your thoughts with me in the comments below. Your voice matters. Your story matters. If you found comfort in this story, please consider subscribing and supporting our channel. Together, we hold space for stories that heal, inspire, and remind us we're never truly alone. Thank you for listening.